in the meridian. And there's the 9 dominant points as well for this as well. So, but the key point here is and this is where when I work with people, is getting to your core truth. And you said, I unconditionally love and accept myself, but we're working with a person like that. And this is where I stress is, how much of that is true for yourself? When I say I unconditionally love, when they say 0. So what's your truth? Then what's the statement? I feel I cannot accept myself. I'm fine. I'm very disgusted with myself. That's your truth in the moment. This is something I highlight very strongly with people, because in that moment of that acknowledgement, I'll go right in the gutter with somebody. I'm so mad. I'm so disappointed in myself. Maybe there's been betrayal, because it's your truth in the moment. Because you're not talking to your mind, you're talking to the body. And when you finally get to the core truth and with the acknowledgement, and with the heel of the hand, you're avoiding the psychological reversal. Your body finally says, finally you listen. Finally somebody says a truth to me inside. Because I've been waiting for someone to hear and see me inside. And that truth is, I'm so disgusted with my behavior. And some other words come out. It's your truth in the moment. When you peel through these layers, I did it in my own life through various times. Underneath it all, we are love. And when we can touch that point in our life, when we get there, it's such a blissful feeling.
Hey, and welcome to the Genius Zone. And I am so excited for this conversation, Richard, because, not only are you a man after my own heart, doing so much of the creative work through NLP and being now a specialist and creator of the embodied alchemy framework. I am so excited to have this conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and share. Thank you.
And there's so much that you've done, and I know my community are just going to absolutely love this, because you are like that person who does all of the kind of subconscious quantum work through neuro-linguistic programming and all of the human behavioral EFT, the alchemizing somatic transformations and all of that. So you are like on steroids. So, what can I say? Sit down, relax, get your favorite drink, and let's get ready, because you are, I believe, going to blow my mind with some of this stuff. But, I always like to start at the very beginning of where I see that people were inspired by their pain. And that's what the Genius Zone is all about. And you yourself, like myself, also have experienced incredible loss. You've probably lost a lot more. I lost significantly my late husband, which is quite public, and my people on the podcast are aware of this. But can you tell me about your loss and how you found this work as a result?
The catalyst loss was my now late wife, 2013. Up until that time, I'd lost all my parents, cancers, suicide, other things, and burying other family members. But my wife passed suddenly with a brain aneurysm, late wife, and suddenly I'm a widow with 2 teenage children. And I really looked at how I understood that I did not want to go into grief and anger, because I understood that quite well. So I realized I needed something different at the time, and I had just discovered emotional freedom technique. Just a few weeks before she passed, I was trying it out a bit, and then I thought I would take a course. Because ultimately, like I said, I looked at my kids, and they were just finishing school, going off their secondary, and I knew consciously I wanted to be somebody different. But I also wasn't going to let them down and go into the usual spiral we do. So the weekend course that I took for 3 days opened up my awareness that there were so many other things in my life, other traumas that were very unacknowledged, but very evident in my nervous system. So that was when I worked to become a practitioner after that with now mentor, and realized that that was the change for me to take care of myself. And then ultimately that self-care led to me being who I needed to be for my family.
I can hear that. So it sounds like you were almost in a position where you told yourself you did not want to go through grief. Is that right?
Yes.
Or do it the way that most people do? Because I know as a widow, I believe that I was given a life lesson from my late husband, who taught me how to be a widow, because when I fell in love with him, he was a widower. So, you know, he had a very similar theory. He didn't want to hold on to those expectations or what they say in, you know, in what is supposed to happen in grief, that you follow this kind of line or this pattern of going through all these emotions. And so he really did short circuit that himself. And so did you find that EFT, like what was it that truly was the instigator for helping you through probably some of the biggest crisis points of that loss?
Well, it was helping a little. The 3-day weekend, which was several months later, I thought I'd be working on my wife's passing. And again, she was in the program. I had other trauma show up, but that I had no idea even existed. So having those exposed and released, and they were extremely visceral. Oh my goodness, they were pretty like very physical releases. I said, what else is in there? And then meeting my now mentor several months later, I really learned what I call self-care. And I took a course, 8-month course with this lady. Her name's Nancy Forrester. She was a psychotherapist at the time, had an 8-month program, and that really was strongly directed on our self-care of me first. And I strongly gravitated to that because I realized I didn't want to contract with grief. I didn't want to go into all the stages, and I don't believe in all that. Well, this is what you should do. This is how you should remember it. No, thank you. No, thank you. I took none of that because I wanted to be me, present with my children and enjoy life and not have them mired in my stuff. Because I knew it generationally. I grew up with this stuff. I grew up with the angry grief. I grew up with watching my mother die for a year in a hospital bed. So I didn't want that experience for my children. And so I became somebody different. And again, I don't like traditional stories that people say what you should do or obligations. People say we aren't stuck in trauma, we're buried in obligations. And I'm like, not a chance.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, that is something that, you know, when people zig, I tend to zag. And so I hold the same philosophy. I didn't want to hurt my life so much by allowing myself to just dilapidate and fall into that grief-stricken element of what people talk about. And yet I'll never be the same. Like, you know, these kind of situations will change you forever. However, I also look at the higher purpose in everything, as I know you would know very much, Richard, which brings me to reminding everyone that we're going to be doing a really powerful transformational exercise at the end of this, which I am so excited for. I'm going to talk about breaking the pattern of perhaps being you, of who you are. I know Joe Dispenza talks about breaking the pattern of yourself, and I guess that's part of the patterns where you are, you know, kind of sinking into all of these old negative beliefs. But this is about healing the identity crisis beneath success. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because I do believe we have just momentarily lost Richard. I will say that when you are breaking a pattern and you are looking to literally let go of a massive crisis, what that is going to mean is that you are going to become a different person. You are creating a different identity. And really what that means, and Richard is going to explore that with us. The other element is, quite often some of the most highly successful people who are driven by success are the ones that are kind of almost hiding and shrinking and drowning underneath their pain. So I know one of the elements that Richard is really looking at is high performing people, and I would put myself into this category, and why they feel so empty. So just to rephrase that question, why do high performing, success driven people feel so empty? Is that the driver? Is that what's actually driving them?
It's what it is, what I've been reading on and experiencing as well, is because many were brought up in households by well-meaning parents, but they were, as children, they were never allowed to acknowledge their emotions. They were always putting on like a role of, this is how you should behave, this is what you should do. Don't get too big, don't get emotional, because so they're never allowed to feel. And it's like I grew up in my own life never knowing. I don't remember crying as a child. I think emotional. I knew anger, but my father wouldn't allow any other emotions. So when you grow up in these households and it's your life is performance based, and what you can do and who you can be and the roles you play. And we talk about the imposter syndrome in so many ways that many of these people have. They put on the mask, and I think that's been going on generationally. And they get into these roles, and time after time after time, you'll see this story like they have achieved something, they've achieved success, but all their success was external validation.
Yes.
And since they got the desk, they got the office, and you look around and is this it? And that's a standard question. Is this what it's for? And then you're not even allowed to understand who you are, or even like what you want in life. So their life is very dysfunctional. It looks great. Many have earned great incomes and it looks polished, but there's a deep disconnection inside. And over time, when so you can only ignore your body and your emotions for so long, and it comes up and kicks you really hard, like really hard. And you'll
do you feel that even watching your mother, and obviously she died, when you were a young person, and obviously that kind of pain would have really etched into your system. Do you think that has driven you to being who you are today? Because I know that I was going to ask you, what happens when you take away all these successful people's pain? Like, you've obviously worked very, very hard on, healing and accomplishing and embodying that kind of alchemy and that framework that we're going to talk about. However, can you look back and see how that pain from losing your mother had etched its way and had a profound influence in your life of who you are today?
What I saw with my mother was so much unexpressed grief in her own life because of I would say the relationship she had with my father. My father could be very cold, military style, and so she didn't have that connection. And my siblings struggled, they really, and I couldn't figure out why were their life so challenged. But again, they were never allowed to have, their expression, and lots of things going on. But I watched them, good people, have chaotic lives, and I couldn't. So again, their lives were externally validated, and I found that I was an internal person. So I chose a different expression, and I had other things show up in my life, but that gave me validity. And the people I worked for, I was a farm kid growing up, so I had good people around me, but at home I didn't have that substance. So there was that balance, but again, I certainly didn't, somewhere I knew I wanted to be happy. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't feel happy. So that driver to why can't I be happy? Why can't I feel like life is something that I want to enjoy? And then like a turning point there was the movie The Secret, the manifestation. But all I received from that was a message was you create your life by the way you think. And I thought I had to figure out the way you think and feel was the creator of my life. That took me another 5 years to put that together. But I realized how sadly my life had felt inside. And I said, I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to, and so I needed to be someone different inside. And so I worked hard to find that way to be happy inside, to be joyful and have a more fulfilling life. And internally, externally, yes, I was fine externally, but no one knew the pain and anger I was carrying inside either. And it was killing me.
And is that the part where healing the identity crisis beneath the success-driven person played a pivotal role for you? Can you talk us through the healing process? Say for someone, like I know I'm very grateful for all of the experiences that I had growing up, for the pain, and some of the misgivings and the biggest challenges with growing up with ADHD and not being able to find a solution as to why I was as smart as the smartest kid in the class, but I couldn't process like them. And so there was this hit and miss going on all the time. And why was I so impulsive? And, what was it that led me to being able to get every single job I ever went for, but not being able to hold down any of them, it was quite ironic. And then going through my first marital breakdown, which really they say, whether you lose someone in your life or whether you lose them through death or you lose them through love, it's still grief. So, I feel that grief it's very different when someone does die, when they do pass. But perhaps you can talk me through how the trauma in the body and how we can move beyond mindset work. How does moving through the physical form almost, I guess, trump being able to overcome mindset?
Well, it's the book Kessel van der Kolk says the body keeps a score, and unconsciously it's such a driver of our feelings and sensations. So when you have these identities we put on, but we're continuing to ignore our body, we don't know who we are. So we're not operating, and I'm going to say, we're doing all these things as a task list, but nothing feels real. And again, to the anger inside because you're doing this, and again, we build up emotions: frustration, disappointment, disgust. We start to hate ourselves. And this huge sense of self-hatred comes in, and then we're trying to put the mask on. We're self-destructing inside because we don't know who we are. Why am I so angry? Why does nothing feel right for me? Because I'm doing all these things. And so when I started to process that journey of my emotions with Nancy with her course, and we were called the Personal Peace Procedure, and this is Gary Craig's work, and that really started to unpack a lot of my old stories I didn't know were there. And that's so. And again, it was all body work. I'm not a fan of. I say this with great respect of just this mindfulness, because you can't ignore pain in your body.
Oh, no.
And your mind cannot process trauma. I mean, that's a physical fact. You need tools. You need all kinds of other work for the body to start to release, because the body has its own language. The heart has its own language. So when we can connect to the body through, somatic release, the tapping, through the different holes we have, that you're starting to, physically regulate your nervous system. And that's key. And that's key for And that's what's starting to let the body feel safe, and change only happens when there is safety.
Right. I love that. So change only happens when there's safety. So I know with the emotional freedom technique, it's all about, tapping and, facing what it is that you're feeling and describing that feeling, and then using those words, even though this is how I'm feeling, whether it's anger or sadness. I truly love and value and accept myself. What is it about the tapping that, people move through the crown and, through the facial features of the eyes and the nose and the chin, and then to the collarbone and under the arm? What is it about these points and speaking those words, even though I'm suffering, and then describing all the sufferings, I truly love and value myself? What do you think is the mechanics behind that?
Well, one, it's you're following the Chinese acupressure meridians. So these meridians, run through a body. All our nervous system runs through them. So the information of your system, and somewhere it connects to your fascia as well. But when you're actually tapping the points, you're acknowledging. But it's like it's a physical acupressure. So that's key in a sense. And there are other sequences of that through thought field therapy. I have a little bit of knowledge of that, of different sequences of that. But the key point of the tapping, you're physically regulating your emotions. So you're with the touch points, you're making an impact in the meridian. And there's the 9 Gommet points as well for this as well. So, but the key point here is when I work with people, is getting to your core truth. And you said I unconditionally love and accept myself, but we're working with a person like that, and this is where I stress is how much of that is true for yourself. When I say I unconditionally love, you may say 0. So what's your truth? Then what's the statement? I feel I cannot accept myself. I'm fine. I'm very disgusted with myself. That's your truth in the moment. This is something I highlight very strongly with people, because in that moment of that acknowledgement, I'll go right into gutter with somebody. I'm so bad. I'm so disappointed in myself. Maybe there's been betrayal, because it's your truth in the moment. Because you're not talking to your mind, you're talking to the body. And when you finally get to the core truth and with the acknowledgement, and with the heal of the hand, you're avoiding the psychological reversal. Your body finally says, finally you listen. Finally somebody says a truth to me inside. Because I've been waiting for someone to hear and see me inside. And that truth is, I'm so disgusted with my behavior. And some other words come out. It's your truth in the moment. When you peel through these layers, I did it in my own life through various times. Underneath it all, we are love. And when we can touch that point in our life, when we get there, it's such a blissful feeling, because we just piled all these stories on top and all these layers and lies to ourselves. So again, I'm adamant on this truth sequence in the moment. It's such a relief to see somebody and a breath comes up and their head comes out. Now we can get somewhere, because now we've got a starting point.
Yes, because you see them kind of take that new breath, don't you? And you know that the moment they breathe, and it's like they've just let go of something. But I absolutely just need to grab hold of something you said that I believe is gold, that the listeners will need to really understand, and that is the truth. You mentioned truth. So quite often we can be walking around in our sleep. A lot of people say, oh, you're a hypnotist. Well, actually, I don't hypnotize people, I unhypnotize them. We are all walking around in our sleep, hypnotized by our old patterns, and we don't even realize that we are going through so much stuff. And it's interesting when you can bring it in and you can say, this is the truth. This is how I'm feeling. It's like, well, okay, it's you're facing it and you're embodying it and you're embracing it. And at that level, that's where you can release it and let it go. And, I understand that you going through the grief of losing your wife back in 2013 and having the intention that I'm not going to allow my life to collapse around me. And this is where, there needs to be a belief system inside of us that's going to really bring that momentum so we can live through that power. And I know that that's what's kept me going. But you've also created a lot of your own modalities, and one of them is time sweeping. Now, I do timeline therapy, and I do quantum, and I do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But would you take us through from survival to freedom, the power of the conscious EFT and time sweeps?
Time sweeps came about with a friend of mine, the co-creator, because with all the modalities we use, sometimes I find we have the kaleidoscope effect, and this is all my language. We've released a belief, we've done this, but yet somehow something else clicks into place that limits us again. And it's natural for somebody, and I thought, why? Because we're always trying to find the needle in a haystack. And with time sweeps came along in the sense of it's actually what we call a time stamp, because my wife had brought me a meme and said, people will remember you in the moment they had the most power over you. And I said, that's a time stamp. And we know how that works down the timeline, because that little 5-year-old fighting with a 7-year-old or the sibling of a parent, it's the same energy when they're fighting 25 years later.
Yeah.
So when it just moves down the chain. It's so dramatic. I mean, when you work with somebody in their 60s and are still fighting with their 90-year-old parent, it's the same story. So with time sweeps, we come up with a sense of open all, and we just address the issue. What I do is start with a topic, and it's topic driven. I'm not looking for the needle in a haystack. I can clear the energy on my way down through the stories, because we hold everything in our system, do I believe, and from a book I read too on it was imagery. When you look at a lot of timeline work, there's an image. When you look at an EFT journey, there's an image. So to me, we are a data-driven, information-filled system and imagery is throughout our entire body. They talk organs. I think other practitioners said it's in the energy fields. So those stories are all interrelated, like an imagery. They have different tails that connect to other imagery. So when I'm saying open all time sweeps to this incident, we can just say to this incident with your mother, at age 5, and I clear, delete, and destroy now. So I'm just clearing and deleting the imagery. So I have the person do a regulation hold, there's some reading under here. And they're just sitting back, just underneath the wrist or below the wrist, that bone there.
Just here, under the wrist, and you just hold it, do you?
Yeah, just 2 fingers really light like that. So I have it's just resting on their lap. And I'm just saying, open all time sweeps to this fight with your mother when you were 6 years old. And from the discussion, I can just understand, what happened, what transpired, and then through experience, intuitively, I know what was going on. And you do. You get a chance to, you yourself read the person. You can see things going on with them, and you'll see them, and their bodies moving, and then they're yawning, right? So you see the patterns of release. So a lot of this is intuitive again, but I understand. What has taken place. So I can cover any topic, and people have had terrible things happen to them. Terrible things. We don't relive any of that. We're not going into any story. We can just say this experience, totally. XYZ, and when we clear it that way, so it's present time. Everything is present time without any reliving of energy. And so my pride and joy, and this is where I've been trained, is safety. Your safety is my priority. But the time sweep is fun because stuff comes out and you see the person and you're almost like, oh, that was good.
I totally hear you, because there's something very spiritual about sitting with a person and, you're recognizing that they're going through all this trigger work and having all these problems in their life today. And as you've called it, time sweeping, I'll take them back on their timeline as they're kind of tracking back to where it all originated and going back to that small child in the room, where they can then give that child the resources that they need, because they've got the hindsight of 2020 vision. And I love that you have really kind of integrated all of this, and intuitively I would be able to know where my client was as well when we were going back on their timeline. So I would go, oh, they're 3. They're in that moment of being 3 years old. And it's interesting that they're playing out that trigger of what was happening to the 3-year-old when they're 33 or 43 or 63. And until they go back and they clear it, it's not there. But just on the EFT, I'm going to ask this question. We do a few rounds of tapping to clear. So we usually start with the karate chop, and we'll say, these are the emotions. This is what we're tackling, you know, the emotions, the feelings, just pouring it out, letting it all release out. Now, when we move through all of the meridians, and we start from the crown of the head and we move through and we state those words, even though I'm feeling all of these emotions, I truly love and value myself. How many rounds do you believe a person needs? Do you actually intuitively kind of get the gist when they're shifting, or do you think there's any rule about that?
Again, intuition there, because you may have a script, and often scripts are in the moment, but pausing after sometimes maybe 3 rounds, depending on how much language you use, you take a breath and ask them, what do you feel? Because they can have where they have a breath, and you know, and again, you have a rating too, because sometimes when you want to start this, you said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is this? Because it's understanding their power. We're guides, we're facilitators. You know, I'm not doing anything other than just guiding along. I want the client to recognize their power, their journey, their strength. And when they can look at this, and I said it was a 10, now it's down to about a 7. Okay, are you ready to do some more? You know, so we gauge ourselves on a scale, and it gets down to maybe 2, 3, and we've done some work. It's all intuitive. You know, okay, let's pause, because we're not trying to fix it all today. But by then, the rest of it may dissipate on its own. You know, and there's some awareness come in, perhaps, or whatever. The biggest thing with that and the time sweeps, to me, the awarenesses come in as they need to. We're not having to look for them. We're not looking for life lessons, so we're not having to let that come through later. Because I always have them, again, try and write down what's going on so they can see and track their journey, and then oh, this happened. I'm recognizing myself now. And then what can we do from this? What actions can you take from this clearing that is a positive for you?
I love what you've said about intuition and taking a breath and asking questions. Because I believe that a really, really good leader, a facilitator, practitioner who's taking that person through it will be able to see in their client when their body shifts. And even if you didn't have that huge radar, like I like yourself, have got a very strong radar of intuition about people, and you can see it in their face. You can tell in their breathing and the way that they shift through all of these elements. Can I ask what you believe was your greatest, or what you believe would be the greatest tool that you have for a person who is going through really etched in trauma or grief?
Well, actually, for when really heavy stuff is the one I use. This one is a temple hold.
Putting your thumbs on the temple?
Lightly, yes. And 2 fingers just above your eyes here. And just,
you
can do this.
My late husband did that.
Yeah, and this is really heavy. This is actually Dawn Eden's work, but she talked about this. You can do phobias, fears, and sometimes sit here. So when I call when the SH hits the fan, This is when you hold your fingers in here and let the story come. Let the rage come with this, because you can, and just, I love, you're angry, let yourself dialogue it out. And I mean, I call this my Chevy Chase rant as well. I do a tapping sequence.
Okay, so you place your thumbs, for those who listen in and perhaps can't see, we're placing the thumbs on the temple. I remember my late husband, being a profound chiropractor, did this. He would place his hands, he'd sit behind the person and have his thumbs on the temple, and then 2 fingers lightly above the eyebrows. And what do you think is with that? I never asked him why he did that. What is it?
Neurovascular points in here. So the other way to do this is hands front and back, but this was what I like. And some people like to find small of the head, back of the head as well.
Yes.
And then cover your forehead.
Well.
And this is good laying in bed, but this work with Don Edens, and they share it freely, is, again, you go into your storm, go into your language, spit nails. I mean, just
don't run away from it.
Yeah, because we don't know how to express ourselves. We go into rage sometimes, and we smash things. And trust me, I do that a lot. But we don't know how to really dispense the energy behind the emotion, what's driving it, the language. So when we can sit here and just, I do this, what I call the tapping sequence too. It's just speak of your frustration. I'm having all this, anxiety, or I'm really upset. So swear like a trooper, because you're speaking your truth. And
is it important though? Can we just, I used to always say, if there were 2 people in the same room with me and they were bickering, I would say it is okay to do that, as long as you are being true to yourself, you're getting it off your chest, and then you're looking for the higher purpose and the outcome through it, rather than just doing this, because if we just go around and around and around and nurse and rehearse our agony, that's obviously not going to have the same impact as what you're describing. How would you get a person to shift from that kind of element? I think, firstly, I just want to say this, and I believe that this is what you mean anyways, is that when you are asking a person to really just come out and bring it all out and say what they're feeling, I believe there's a huge level of intention in that. It's not just that they're on a rant or they're just going mindlessly about something that they're not going to, turn around and pivot and change. So intention would be the first thing. How would you suggest a person who is perhaps on their own, or if a person happens to be a healer like yourself and does this kind of leadership work, how do you get them to move from that rant and getting it all out intentionally and moving them into the next feeling of bliss or peace or some kind of serenity or neutrality?
With that one regulation hold is because we're actually physically regulating our nervous system, and we're allowing ourselves to verbalize. We're actually releasing the tension in the body from the nervous system. Because if we just rant, right, we're just ranting, because we're just verbalizing, but we're still not dispensing the energy, the pent up energy in the system regulation. So when we can do either a tapping sequence or a nervous hold like that, the energy, the language is held, and that energy is being dissipated, if I'm saying that right. So the tension is physically coming out of the body, physically by the regulation, and we're giving ourselves our truth of that dispense of language. So the two are a combination. Again, I know what it's like to smash things, but you're right. And especially when people bicker, it's just a repeat pattern. There's no dispensing. There's no lowering of tension or dissipation of the connectivity of language and tension.
So I think the important part is you talked about placing the hands on one hand on the front of your forehead, and then the other sort of almost at the nape or the top of the neck at the very bottom of the head, and then actually speaking it, because obviously that action, that's what you're saying is helping release it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I just thought I'd clear that up, because there'll be people that listen to this as a podcast and they'll be hearing it. So I just want them to understand, if they were seeing it, what they could expect. So that moves me over to pattern breaking and moving through to the embodied alchemy framework. And I believe there's a few steps that you take people through. Would you like to impart your wisdom?
With the pattern breaking, because we grew up with patterns and we inherit patterns, which is our habits. Napoleon Hill said, we don't create our life, we inherit our habits. And the patterns, they're what we experienced growing up. And oftentimes we repeat them, not realizing, we're just doing the same as what we grew up with. And when we look at ourselves and have these patterns of behavior, it's again, we wonder why do we feel so stuck when obviously we're living the same life our parents did and they weren't happy either. So why did we expect something different, right? Same old. So with the embodied alchemy framework, we talk about when the body's secret language. I have six parts of this, right? In the sense of, it's called, the biological sticky notes of the body, because it has memories in there. And it has when you have one of your five senses or more have a response, somebody says something. And I think in relationships, tonality and voice inflection impact us so strongly. Somebody is a snippy little replier, or the answer. So it triggers a sensation in our body, and then it does a chemical reaction in our mind. So we suddenly get what I call our backup. Or, and so the pattern repeats itself again. The body's a holder of the emotions in that. So like I said, it's a secret journal written in sensations. And when you look at like a lot of war people, traumatic experiences, it gets layered and layered in there. And even in childhood, it does not release. They say time heals, time buries, time suffocates.
Wow, so that's interesting. Time buries, not time heals. That is very profound. So is this kind of secret journaling type of thing? How do we unbury that stuff that time has pushed down and hidden?
Well, over time, like I said, they say 80% of our illnesses are caused from emotional disruption.
Yeah.
So what's going on in life? What are we not? Where are we having? We're having probably physical ailments. We're having consistent pattern, what I call pattern conflicts. I saw people in my job I worked at for many years. People had changed departments and had the same fight with a different member.
I shouldn't laugh. I really shouldn't laugh. But it's a different person. It's a different day, and it's the same kind of fight or argument or trigger that's come from way back when. So what do we do? What's part of your alchemy framework to dislodge that?
Well, when we look at where it is in my framework, what is it? Is it a pattern? So I look at it. Is it the body code going on that people say they have this anger flash? Is it a sense of is there a pattern with, is it disruption they have? Like I said, these patterns that show up in their life and people see it in marriages. They'll marry the same person over and over, different hair color, right? The same conflicts. What's that pattern shows up? Well, they do this and I do this, and then we're in, it's a money pattern, it's a relationship pattern, it's a intimacy pattern, it's a behavior pattern of what we do, how we interact with each other. So with the pattern disruption too, we look at um, where the triggers are.
Yeah.
In each one, because everything has a trigger. What's the trigger? People don't recognize their triggers either, because if somebody says something, they don't realize. And over time, when something keeps triggering us and we don't acknowledge it, again, that gets compounded in our system.
Yes.
You know, when somebody says something, we have to know, well, that's just the way they speak, but it becomes an irritant. It doesn't go away. It continues to build in our system.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So what do you do? What's the remedy to
recognizing this voice again through the tapping the sequence? We start to look at, regulating the body, and then understanding what it is. So and what happens in there when you can start to regulate too, you can find ways to have your voice, because in all this time we suffer in silence. We don't know how to speak our truth. We don't know how to be authentic in ourselves and our behavior, because we're not living our own life. So when we look at the language in the body, or the patterns that are there that we have sort of boxed ourselves into, and realize, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not behaving or going to take this in silence anymore. I'm going to start speaking my truth or asking questions. And it doesn't mean we're going to fight back. It means we're going to have some dialogue to question somebody, or say, when you're saying this, I'm really feeling off, or I want to understand more of why this upsets me. So can we work together for this, so I have more peace in my life? And it's ultimately about finding our truth and being authentic with ourselves. And that's a word we haven't talked about, because the authenticity out there is really,
I'm glad you said it. Yes, yes.
to the core of us. And we have to go through these layers of, understanding of the patterns we have lived by, the way we've done things. Yeah. Are we like, I love the thing when you see who wants change, and all these people line up, who wants to change, and nobody's at that box. And the point is, I wanted to change, and I had to be responsible for me. So it's taking that self-responsibility of change, to understanding these pattern disruptions, looking at what's happened in my life to cause me to be this way. There is generational trauma as well that comes in. But we were told.
I can hear that. So what I've just picked up from what you've said, it's like the triggers are almost the gold, because we're going to turn the trigger and the trauma into the power, and the wounds into the wisdom. So the first thing is to recognize, and the second thing is to then know how to release it. You've talked us through EFT, and we're about to do a little modality with Richard in just a moment. So sit tight, everyone. And, and then it's revolutionizing, because it's about breaking that. But then, bringing in the authenticity. So how important is it for us to become authentic? Are we being authentic to the other person, or are we really being authentic to ourselves, or both?
We have to be authentic to ourselves, because ultimately this is self-care. And we were told it's selfish. My driving force with people is for people to find their voice and self-care. Because when you have self-care, and this is, I believe, what helped me be strong. My late wife and I were always, didn't realize, we didn't do it because we were so smart, but we were always just ourselves. We were authentic. And when she passed, I really worked on just being me, because and my kids saw my mystical side come out. I'm very energetic and mystical in ways, and they saw me with my tarot cards and other things. And I asked my daughter, "So what do you think?" She goes, "That's just you, Dad." So there was no judgment. There was acceptance of my journey, and what it did. And my kids are now in their 30s. Like I said, it allowed them to be them, to live their lives.
Yeah.
And without trying to be somebody else.
Yeah. As I remember, a girlfriend rang me 2 days after my husband passed, and she said, "Oh, how are you?" And I started speaking all philosophy, and what Ian, the legacy he'd left, and what he wanted me to do, and where he is now, and the fact that his physical form has passed, but he's energetically still around. And it's interesting. She turned around, she said, Terry, you sound like Abraham Hicks, which I don't know whether you know Esther Hicks, who becomes Abraham through channeling. And I feel that, it's what we tell ourselves and what we believe. But we need to come to this part of the show where, we've promised that we are going to have this little snippet from you, Richard, and I can't wait. So I've been waiting for this. So where do we start? Where do we go? And can you lead us through this beautiful gift that you have for us?
We have emotions every day, and people. When have you done this? When you're dead, you're going to have feelings and emotions and storms every day. So it's a matter of not being in releasing the ones that really were bothering you in the past. But oftentimes we go through feelings and day sensations with our partner, and sometimes we get irritated. Whatever it's us, whatever happens, I guess. What is this? So one of the things I come up with my timesheets is putting one hand on the belly button and the other hand on the heart. And because we don't know what it is, we're just suddenly we're feeling pissed off.
Okay. So you do this when you're pissed off. You put your hand on your belly button and your hand on your heart.
Yep. And just say the words, open, please.
Sorry?
Say the words, open, please.
Open, please. Okay. Open, please. So are you referring to your heart and your gut space opening?
Yeah, I'm opening up the energy of whatever this is that's pissing me off. I don't know what it is. It's a trigger. Something happened, because again, throughout the day, if you're out shopping, whatever, somebody says something and you're getting irritated, and it may not have been them. Something's got you, ticked you off, So but the biggest thing to me is curiosity is everything. I'm an incredibly curious person. So when I'm looking at this, I'm not looking for an answer here. I'm not looking for it. I'm just opening up the energy. Open, please, to this, and I can say to the sensation. Open, please, to whatever has got me going right now. Open, please. And I can yawn even doing it now.
Wow.
So I'm just being curious. And this is a pause sometimes when you're in a situation and you trying not to react, you choose a response. I could go into a story about that as well, but it's so I'm just open, please, my frustration, my whatever's got me going. Open, please, and again, be truthful with yourself, but you're not looking for a defined answer. I can clear that. Just opening the energy up so you have a chance to choose a response of yourself, or just calming yourself down.
Wow. And
opening up the end, maybe somebody's come in and drop something off on your desk, and you're looking down and going, oh, not again, right? So open, please.
That's it. Again, it's very, very intentional, extremely intentional, because I know that I will wake up and I will ask myself the question that I need the answer for. What is it that I need to do today to make this happen? And I know by putting that question out there and not trying to answer it, I feel that that's the most important thing. I believe that people, self-discipline is really overrated. Trying to find the solutions right now is extremely unrealistic. So it's asking that question and giving it to God, to the universe, so that you will realize that answer when it comes, because you've put it out there. As long as you don't try to find it straight away, and as long as you don't say, I don't know, because I don't know is the barrier and the block, of course, to that. And, the show wouldn't be the show without this question, because I know I could sit here for another hour. We've just touched the surface here, Richard. And, we have touched on how a lot of people are driven, successful, high-achieving people are driven from their pain. And I feel that that is a kudos. However, it's really important to heal that pain. And you've talked a lot about these healing modalities and how it's so important to acknowledge that the pain can sometimes get buried in the body. What is it that you feel that we may not have touched on today that if you get off this podcast, you're going to say, I really would have loved to have mentioned that? Is there anything that you would like to touch on?
Looking at your life, I think the big question is, who have you lived your life for? Have you lived it for you? And have you lived it? Again, most people aren't impacted by trauma. They're impacted by obligations. We live our lives to do all these so-called good things for others and become people pleasers and truly never get to live our life. You're 50, 60 years old and you're looking at what is it about? Like, when's it my turn? When's it my turn? So I understand that from, my own journey of here we are, we've become nomads living in Mexico after, coming from Canada and living our life a very, very simple one. And there's a statement I've came to me, and it's not, I didn't originate, but the less we are, the more we become.
Wow. That's profound. The less we are, the more we become. That almost comes back to the whole minimalist thing as well, isn't it? I say less is more, but can you open that up, explain that?
Well, it comes down to the less we are all the things we should be, all the things we're supposed to be a so-called a good person by our society and what our family taught, and we don't become ourselves. People live their entire lives by being a performer. So the less we are of all these external expectations, the more we come of our true selves and experience ourselves in the most joyful way. I just knew when I was, I wasn't happy for many years, decades of my life, but I knew somewhere I wanted to be joyful. I'm 69 years old, living an incredible life, and I can honestly say I'm joyful.
Wow, you're probably happier now than you've been because you've come to accept this. Yeah. And you've come to, and I love the fact that you are a minimalist. I don't think we've touched on that, but I know I've put it in the show notes. And I can relate to that very, very much. And I do believe in the less is more. And I also believe that we are a state of the way that we live. So if we're living in clutter and dishevelment, then surely that's going to have an impact on our life and our brain. And even if we are and we do that, like I look around me right now and there is a fair bit of clutter on my table. But I think there's also that kindness that we've got to be able to be kind to ourselves as well and say, well, okay, even though I may be experiencing this or doing this, I truly love and value myself. So, Richard, I am so grateful for your time and your wisdom and just everything that you've brought here. And is there any last words before we conclude?
I go back to a statement, the less we are, the more we become, because it's about becoming yourself. This whole journey at the end of the day is you have to look at yourself and who am I? What have I done for me?
Yeah.
That's what I have to answer to.
Yeah, so become more of you and be less of all of this stuff that's going on out there in the world and comparisonitis and everything else. What an amazing, incredible journey this has been with you for the last nearly 1 hour. And I don't usually go to the hour, but I have to say that it feels like it's been 5 minutes. So, Richard, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you very much.